Captain Rebecca Whitman's voice sliced through the quiet hum of the pilot's lounge. She clutched her phone like a weapon. "I'm telling you, there's a kid in here, causing trouble. Get here now." She ended the call and turned her glare on 16-year-old Elijah Jackson, her shadow falling over him like a judgment. "Get out," she commanded. "You don't belong here." Her voice, sharp and authoritative, seemed to echo in the cavernous room. Elijah, dwarfed by her uniformed presence, felt his own voice tremble as he tried to respond. His visitor badge, the key to his dream day, dangled from its lanyard. "Ma'am, my tour guide. She said I could wait here." "I don't care what she said. This area is for authorized personnel only," Whitman cut in, her hand already moving to her radio. "Security to the pilot's lounge. I have an unauthorized individual for immediate removal." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Elijah's confusion. He had been watching a documentary on the television. Was that a crime? This wasn't just any room to Elijah. It was a sanctuary. The air thrummed with the promise of the skies he had spent his life dreaming of. At 16, he could distinguish a Boeing from an Airbus by the specific whine of its engines. His walls weren't papered with rock stars, but with complex aviation charts. While his friends chased social media fame, Elijah chased the horizon. This Tuesday was supposed to be the culmination of that dream. He had poured his heart into an essay for Horizon Airlines' Career Shadow Day, and his passion had won him a spot over hundreds of other applicants. The prize was a backstage pass to the world he longed to join. Hours earlier, his guide, Tanya Reynolds, had watched with an amused twinkle in her eye as he rattled off facts about flight planning that would impress a junior pilot. "You've done your homework," she'd said, and Elijah had beamed. "My mom says if you want something, you need to know it inside and out." He'd walked through the control tower, a cathedral of screens and quiet commands. He'd sat in the cockpit of a Boeing 787, the scent of hydraulic fluid and worn leather filling his senses, his questions about thrust ratios and emergency protocols impressing everyone he met. Then, around noon, Ms. Reynolds had been called away. "An urgent issue, Elijah. I'll be back in 20 minutes, she'd promised. "Wait here in the lounge. There's a great documentary on." Elijah had settled into a chair, captivated by the story of flight unfolding on the screen. He was so engrossed in the engineering marvels before him that he didn't notice the lounge slowly emptying, until the only two people left were him and the senior pilot who had just walked in. Captain Rebecca Whitman took one look at the young black teenager sitting alone in her sanctuary and saw not a dreamer, but a threat. She had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Whitman crossed the room in 3 purposeful strides, snatched the remote, and silenced the documentary mid-sentence. The screen went dark, reflecting Elijah's stunned face. "How did you get in here?" she demanded, her voice like clipped steel. Her crisp uniform and commanding stance were weapons of intimidation, and they were working. "Ms. Reynolds brought me," Elijah repeated, his voice barely a whisper. He fumbled for his badge, a tangible piece of his dream. "I'm with the Career Shadow Program. I have clearance." The badge was his proof, his pride. It read, "Official Visitor," his name and photo clearly visible. But before he could even hold it up properly, Whitman snatched it from his neck, the lanyard clip snapping. Elijah's jaw dropped, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of confusion and fear. His perfect day was shattering into a million pieces, and he didn't know why. Whitman scrutinized the badge, holding it to the light as if it were a forgery. Her lips thinned. "This is fake," she declared, her tone dripping with accusation. "Or stolen. They don't give this clearance to someone like you." The words "someone like you" hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "I won an essay contest," Elijah pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, just call Ms. Reynolds. She's in HR. She'll tell you." But the captain wasn't listening. "Security," she barked into her radio again, her voice laced with new urgency. "I have a subject with fraudulent credentials, possible security breach. I need officers now." Her voice carried into the hallway. Heads turned. A small crowd began to gather, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. No one stepped forward. In their eyes, Elijah saw his reflection, an intruder, a criminal. Humiliation burned his cheeks. Was this really happening? Was dreaming of being a pilot a crime for someone who looked like him? The horrifying thought of being arrested, of this moment scarring his future, his college applications, his entire life, sent a wave of panic through him. "Please," he whispered, the fight draining from him. "I just want to call my mom." Whitman, however, was now performing for her audience. This is exactly the kind of threat we're trained to identify, she announced, holding up his badge like a trophy. This is how breaches happen. Elijah stood frozen, watching his dream dissolve into a nightmare. Just moments ago, he had been watching a film about conquering the skies. Now, he had never felt more small, more trapped, more utterly alone. When the two airport security officers arrived, a cold dread unlike anything he had ever known washed over Elijah. This was no longer just a misunderstanding. This was the fear his parents had warned him about in hushed, serious tones, a fear that had little to do with guilt and everything to do with perception. News stories of innocent lives derailed by a single accusation flashed through his mind. "Name and purpose here," the first officer said, his pen poised over a notepad. Before Elijah could speak, Whitman interjected. "I found him snooping around. He has a counterfeit badge and refuses to explain himself." Snooping? He had been watching television. Counterfeit? It had been his proudest possession. Each lie was a physical blow. "I was invited," Elijah said, his voice faint. "The Career Shadow Program. Please, just call Ms. Reynolds." His words vanished into the tense air. The questions came like machine gun fire. "How did you get past security? Who gave you this? Are you working with anyone?" The room seemed to shrink. He thought of his 8th birthday, of watching the jets carve arcs against a perfect blue sky, the day he knew what he wanted to be. He thought of his mother's smile. "I just want to be a pilot," he whispered, to himself as much as to them. "Please, can I call my mom?" The officers exchanged a look. After a moment, one nodded reluctantly. "Make it quick." With hands that shook so badly he could barely unlock his phone, Elijah dialed. He fought to keep his voice from breaking, to shield his mother from the panic clawing at his throat. "Mom," he began, the word a lifeline. "I'm at Terminal C. There's a situation." He listened, his eyes wide and glistening. "I'm in the pilot's lounge. They think my badge is fake." He forced a calm he didn't feel. "No, I'm okay, just please come." As he hung up, Whitman seized her moment, turning to address the growing gallery of onlookers. "This," she announced, her voice ringing with self-righteous authority, "is a perfect example of why our protocols must be absolute." She gestured toward Elijah as if he were an exhibit. "The mother he's calling is likely a janitor here. I'll see to it she's fired, so her son learns not to trespass." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elijah bowed his head, the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. An incident report, a black mark that might follow him forever. "We'll wait 5 more minutes," the senior officer said. "Then we're processing him." The seconds ticked by, each one a hammer blow against his hope. Captain Whitman checked her watch impatiently. "I have a flight to prepare for," she sighed. "I've done my duty." The casual cruelty of her words, the ease with which she could shatter his world and simply walk away, almost broke him. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He was just a boy in a room, waiting for either salvation or ruin, wondering if the sky would ever feel like it belonged to him again. The final minute of Elijah's 5-minute grace period was ticking away when a subtle shift rippled through the terminal. It was a change in pressure, a sudden quiet that fell over the ambient noise. A security radio crackled. "VIP approaching pilot's lounge, clear the path." Confusion flickered across the officers' faces. Airport staff stood at attention. A team of executive protection specialists in tailored black suits moved with practiced efficiency, clearing a path through the corridor. They were followed by a retinue of vice presidents and assistants, their faces etched with urgency. Elijah looked up. Through the blur of his tears, confusion melted into recognition, then into a relief so profound it seemed to lift him from his chair. A small smile touched his lips. The crowd parted as if by an invisible force, and Maya Jackson entered. She did not simply walk. She commanded the very air she moved through. Her charcoal suit was a statement, her posture an embodiment of power. On her lapel, beside a string of aviation accolades, gleamed the simple, unmistakable pin of the chief executive officer of Horizon Airlines. Whispers cascaded through the onlookers. "That's Maya Jackson, the CEO." Everyone knew her. Everyone saw her. Everyone except Captain Whitman, who still had her back turned, oblivious to the thunderbolt that was about to strike. "As I was saying," Whitman insisted, her voice tight with irritation, "we need to process this report. I have a flight to Chicago." The security officers were no longer listening. Their eyes were locked on Maya Jackson. She was the woman who had started as a flight attendant, become a pilot, and bought the airline. Maya Jackson didn't just run Horizon Airlines. She was Horizon Airlines. And as her gaze swept the room, it finally settled on the tear-streaked face of the boy in the corner, her son. The boy who had been cowering just moments before now stood a little taller. His eyes, though still traced with the lines of shed tears, had begun to brighten. The change in his posture was subtle, but profound. The shift from a young man bracing for disaster to one who had suddenly been reminded of his own worth. Without a word to anyone else, Maya walked directly to Elijah. The terminal seemed to fall silent. Even the overhead announcements paused, as if the entire airport were holding its collective breath. She embraced him. It was not a quick, perfunctory hug, but the fierce, protective embrace of a mother who has found her child in distress. She held him close, feeling his heart still racing from the ordeal, and whispered something in his ear that made his shoulders finally relax. For just a moment, she wasn't the CEO of a major airline or one of the most powerful women in the industry. She was simply a mother, comforting her son. The mix of vulnerability and strength in that embrace spoke volumes. Then, with one arm still around Elijah's shoulders, she turned to face Captain Whitman. The transformation was instantaneous and chilling. The warmth that had enveloped Elijah vanished, replaced by a cold fury so controlled, so precise, that it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not raised. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind that comes not from a title, but from a lifetime of earning power through sheer force of will. "That's my son," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You're accusing of theft, Captain Whitman." Captain Whitman froze mid-sentence, turning slowly to face the source of the voice she so clearly recognized. The self-righteous flush drained from her face, as if a plug had been pulled. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no sound emerged. In that moment of stunning silence, the power dynamic that had defined the last hour collapsed completely. The accuser became the accused, the authority figure, the subordinate. The woman who had wielded her position like a weapon now stood defenseless before a much greater power. The silence that followed Maya Jackson's declaration was absolute. All eyes were fixed on Captain Whitman as her complexion turned ashen against her Navy uniform. Her gaze darted frantically between Maya and Elijah, finally making the connection she had failed to see before. The same strong jawline, the same intelligent eyes, the same quiet dignity, even under pressure. "Miss Jackson," one of the security officers said, immediately lowering his notepad. "We didn't realize." "Clearly," Maya responded, her tone glacial. The officers stepped back, suddenly unsure of their role. The crowd of onlookers had grown, with pilots and flight attendants gathering at a respectful distance. An executive from Maya's entourage leaned toward one of the security officers. "That's Maya Jackson," he whispered, just loud enough to be heard. "CEO and majority owner of Horizon Airlines. She owns 53% of the company outright." Captain Whitman's eyes widened. Not just CEO. Owner. Not just Elijah's mother, her boss. The person who could, with a single decision, end the career she had spent 20 years building. Her carefully constructed authority was crumbling, the foundation of her confidence washing away like sand. "Miss Jackson," Whitman finally managed, her voice a half-octave higher than its usual commanding tone. "I had no idea." She stopped, then tried again. "I was just following protocol." Another false start. "If I'd known he was your son..." And there it was, the fatal mistake, laid bare in her own words. Maya's expression hardened. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it, Captain Whitman?" she said, cutting her off. "My son was terrified because you criminalized him for watching television while waiting for his tour guide. Is that your protocol? To traumatize students in our career program based on snap judgments? To confiscate legitimate credentials and call security on a child who was exactly where he was supposed to be?" Each question landed like a precision strike. This wasn't the outburst of an angry mother. This was the calculated response of a CEO who had navigated boardrooms dominated by men who underestimated her. Whitman opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. What could she say? That she hadn't bothered to check if Elijah was authorized? That she had assumed, based on nothing but his appearance, that he couldn't possibly belong? "Miss Jackson," One of her executives stepped forward, tablet in hand. "We've accessed the security footage. It clearly shows Mr. Jackson seated quietly, watching the documentary that runs in the pilot's lounge. He never leaves his seat until Captain Whitman confronts him." Another executive spoke up. "We've also confirmed with HR that Elijah Jackson is enrolled in our shadow program. His credentials are legitimate." With each piece of evidence, Captain Whitman seemed to physically diminish. Her shoulders hunched, her posture curving into a defensive crouch. "I didn't realize," she began again. "No," Maya agreed, her tone clinical. "You didn't realize that my son had every right to be here. You didn't realize that your assumptions were based on prejudice rather than fact, and you didn't realize that actions have consequences." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was more than a confrontation. It was a public reckoning. "Captain Whitman," Maya continued, her calm more intimidating than any shout could have been. "In the 20 minutes since I received my son's call, I've reviewed our company policies, your employment record, and the preliminary security footage. This isn't your first incident involving questionable judgment. There are 3 prior complaints in your file, all involving young employees of color who you felt were out of place." Whitman's face took on a grayish tinge. Those complaints had been filed, but never acted upon. Until now. "As CEO of Horizon Airlines and as a mother, I cannot allow this behavior to continue," Maya said, straightening to her full height. "You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full review. 6 months without pay. Captain Amara Johnson will be taking your routes, starting today." The pronouncement fell like a gavel in a courtroom, final, decisive, and public. The consequence was proportional to the offense, carried out with the same public scrutiny Whitman had subjected Elijah to. "Ms. Jackson, please," Whitman tried one last time, her voice a whisper. "My record. My 20 years of service." "Should have taught you better judgment," Maya finished for her. "My decision stands." She turned to an executive. "Please escort Captain Whitman to HR. Have her credentials restricted until the review is complete." As Whitman was led away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Maya turned back to Elijah. Her CEO persona softened once more. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. Elijah nodded, straightening under his mother's touch. The fear was gone, replaced by a mixture of relief and a new, hard-won understanding. "I am now," he said, his voice steadier than it had been all day. The contrast was stark. Captain Whitman, who had begun the hour standing tall with unearned authority, now walked away diminished. Elijah, who had been reduced to tears, now stood tall beside his mother, reclaiming his dignity. As the crowd began to disperse, a tall black woman in a pilot's uniform approached them. The 4 stripes on her shoulders identified her as Captain Amara Johnson. "Captain Johnson," Maya said with a nod. "Thank you for being available." "Always, Ms. Jackson," she replied, her voice warm but professional. Her gaze then shifted to Elijah, her expression softening. "And Mr. Jackson," she said, "my flight to Chicago doesn't leave for another hour. I'd be honored to give you a tour of the cockpit, a real one." Elijah looked up, surprise momentarily displacing the fear on his face. "Really? Even after all this?" "Especially after all this," Captain Johnson replied firmly. "The flight deck is where you belong, young man, if that's where your passion leads you." The simple validation in those words seemed to straighten Elijah's spine. A tentative smile grew on his face. "I'd like that very much, Captain Johnson." "Go ahead," Maya said, squeezing his shoulder. "I'll meet you at gate B-17 in 30 minutes. As Elijah walked away with Captain Johnson, already deep in conversation about the Boeing 787's flight systems, Maya watched them go, her expression shifting from protective mother to visionary CEO. She had just witnessed a systemic failure, and she was already formulating a plan to fix it at its roots. 1 month later, the pilot's lounge at Terminal C looked very different. The walls now displayed framed photographs of diverse aviation pioneers alongside current Horizon pilots of all backgrounds. A large screen cycled through profiles of the company's new mentorship program participants. Elijah himself stood before a group of high school students. He was no longer the scared teenager from a month ago, but an ambassador for the New Horizon Futures program. "Aviation isn't just about flying planes," he explained to the rapt teenagers. "It's about understanding systems, communications, and human factors. Every one of you has something unique to bring to this industry. Behind him, Captain Amara Johnson, now the official head of the mentorship initiative, nodded in agreement. The sky has room for all of you, she added, her voice resonating with promise. Don't let anyone tell you differently. That evening, in Maya's office overlooking the main terminal, mother and son sat watching the planes take off and land. How did it go today? Maya asked. Good, Elijah said thoughtfully. They ask tough questions about what happened to me. And how do you answer? I tell them the truth, he said, that I was scared. That for a few minutes I believed what Captain Whitman seemed to believe, that I didn't belong there. His voice grew stronger. Now I know better. But Mom, what would have happened if you weren't who you are? What if my mom wasn't the CEO? Would anyone have believed me? It was the question that had haunted them both. The uncomfortable truth that his salvation had come not just from justice, but from privilege. Maya took her son's hands in hers. That's why I started the program. Because not every child has a mother who owns an airline. But every child deserves to be believed. She paused, then shared something she rarely discussed. When I was first training as a pilot 25 years ago, I was often the only woman, and almost always the only black woman. There was a chief instructor who was convinced I didn't belong. He tested me harder, criticized me more harshly, questioned my competence at every turn. Elijah listened, captivated. One day, after I aced a difficult simulation he was sure I would fail, he told me that I might have passed the test, but I would never fit in with the culture of aviation. She smiled, but there was old pain behind it. I was terrified every single day that he would find a reason to wash me out of the program. I second-guessed myself constantly. I worked twice as hard as everyone else. I slept half as much, all of it, just to prove I deserved to be there. What happened? Elijah asked, his voice soft. I graduated at the top of my class, she replied. I was hired by a regional airline, and I worked my way up, one flight at a time. And eventually, once I had earned enough seniority and influence, I made certain that instructor could never again have the power to discourage a student like me. She squeezed her son's hands, her gaze meeting his. But here is what I wish someone had told me then. What I want you and every single one of those students to know. Fear should never be the price of following your dreams. The anxiety I lived with, the terror you experienced in that lounge, that is not the inevitable cost of being a pioneer. It is a failure of the system, and it is a failure we can fix. Her gaze drifted to the window. Outside, a Horizon Airlines jet was taking off, its lights like rising stars against the darkening sky as it climbed, steady and sure, into the night. That's why this new diversity initiative isn't just about recruitment numbers or public relations. It's about changing the culture from the inside out. It's about making sure the next generation of dreamers never has to be afraid. On the wall behind them hung a large framed poster titled, "The New Face of Horizon Airlines." In the center stood Captain Amara Johnson, poised and confident in her uniform, surrounded by a diverse group of young people, Elijah among them. Across the bottom, in bold letters, were the words that had become both a slogan and a promise. Fear should never be the price of following your dreams. In the 6 months since that day in the pilot's lounge, those words had grown to mean far more than a corporate initiative. They had become a rallying cry for an industry in transformation, a powerful reminder that the sky, vast and boundless, truly does have room for everyone. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others so that we can continue to bring you more like it. We'll see you in the next one.